Hello, and welcome to today's health webinar. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at VizAI and Salesforce. We would like to remind you that the Q&A feature is available, so feel free to send in your questions and comments throughout today's webinar. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Chandana Fitzgerald.
Good morning, good afternoon. A warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today on our webinar, Is Your Pharma Strategy Ready for the AI-Empowered HCP of today and tomorrow? Before we jump in and I introduce you to some of the terrific panelists we have, I want to just give you a bit of context on why this topic and what the current climate is that we're working with. So let's jump right in. These are the guests who you will be meeting in a moment. The AMA actually conducted a survey among physicians back in 2023 and then repeated the same survey in November of 2024, really to understand what the HCP appetite is like and the attitudes to the use of AI and what concerns they have with the use of AI. Some of the data that was recovered from the survey is super interesting. 68% physicians definitely see an advantage in patient care as of 2024, which is up from 63% in 2023 as it relates to the use of AI. And a more staggering statistic is the actual utilization of AI has surged to 66% in 2024 by HCPs compared to under 40% in 2023. So it's very clear that this is here to stay. So we as an industry, as an ecosystem, need to be prepared for what this is to bring and what opportunities it comes with. We've witnessed before our eyes the evolution of AI as well within a matter of months, actually. So we've gone from generative AI, which needed a lot of prompts and requests from the user and learn from existing data, to what we're all using today, AI agents that are autonomous, more adaptable, scalable, and have their own reasoning. And that's what we're here to talk about today, AI agents. So I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Frank, who's the SVP and General Manager of Life Sciences at Salesforce, to introduce himself as well as tell us a little bit about the work Salesforce is doing in the space.
Sure, thank you. So, my name is Frank DeFesh, and I head up life sciences here at Salesforce, which is an industry-specific business unit here at the company. And I'm responsible for how Salesforce supports both the pharma and medtech industries and how they engage with healthcare organizations, patients, and providers through innovative, purpose-built products. For the past 25 years, 9 years at Salesforce and 16 years at Veeva Systems, I've been focused on applying and implementing technology to improve how people engage and how things get done in the life sciences industry. From the early days of cloud in 2000 to these exciting AI times we're in today, thanks for having me. And just touching a bit on our offering, Life Sciences Cloud is an end-to-end patient and provider engagement platform from clinical through commercial. It's a suite of purpose-built or out-of-the-box applications for the life sciences industry. And with Agentforce, it's transformed from an engagement platform to really an intelligent engagement operating system with insights and actions, connecting and improving experiences for both patients and providers across their journey. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Frank. Up next, we have Chris Mancy, co-founder and CEO of VizAI.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for having me today. So my name is Chris Mancy, neurosurgeon by background, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of VizAI. We are the first and currently only scaled healthcare AI solution in the United States. We cover over 230 million lives across 1,800 hospitals and health systems in the United States, and work with a lot of the top pharma companies, particularly the commercial teams, with the goal of serving our mission to increase access to life-saving treatments, to make sure patients with disease get to the right place at the right time so they can benefit from all of the amazing work that many of the audience members do every day. With Salesforce, we're not just driving more patients to diagnosis and treatment, but also providing tools for pharma commercial teams to leverage real-time data insights, clinical workflow, and really make medicine, which is a team sport, into a collaboration between industry, HCPs, and the health system. Let me show you how it works.
Viz AI and Salesforce, Pharma's next-gen agentic commercial platform. Think of Viz AI as Agentforce for doctors. Viz is the most widely deployed clinical AI platform in the United States, implemented in over 1,800 hospitals, covering more than 230 million lives, and used by top pharma companies like Novartis, BMS, and Sanofi, and top health systems like Cleveland Clinic, HCA, Mount Sinai, and UCSD. The Viz platform enables health systems to improve care, and along with Salesforce, we enable pharma to accelerate brand launch and adoption. Here's how it works. AI agents analyze medical tests, like CT scans and information from the EMR, to find patients with disease and route them to the right specialist. It then helps the doctor do their work, summarizing the EMR, comparing each case with clinical guidelines, identifying care gaps, and enabling care coordination that accelerates patients' path to appropriate therapy. In the same HCP workflow, Viz enables pharma to deliver point-of-care education, support treatment selection, and patient onboarding. Viz and Life Science Cloud agents work together to activate, educate, and support HCPs to select the right therapy and streamline patient access and onboarding directly in the clinical workflow. In parallel, real-time data flows between Viz and Life Science Cloud, guiding pharma's field force toward next best actions and informing marketing teams on high-impact campaigns. This is the future of pharma go-to-market: contextual, relevant, and actionable. It's made possible by Viz AI and Salesforce.
All right, and now it's time for our third panelist. We have Jane, who's the head of SVP of Digital from Pfizer. Jane, welcome. Would love an intro to you as well.
Chanda and everybody, good morning, good afternoon. It's great to be here. As Chanda and as you said, I'm Jane von Kirschbach. I lead digital commercial organization at Pfizer. My team is responsible for all technology, data, AI, digital capabilities supporting our commercial business globally, sales, marketing, patient access, and all of the related capabilities, including any technology that is HCP or patient-facing. You know, I tell people I'm a geek at heart. I started with a computer science degree, worked as an engineer for a few years, and I always thought that technology was challenging, but also interesting. But at some point, I realized that people were even more interesting and fascinating. So I went back to school, got an MBA in organizational change management. And since then, most of my roles were at the intersection of technology, people, and innovation. And as I think about the work that we all have done in life sciences over the years, what I get most energized about is when we have a chance to create a vision and then enable transformation that allows our organization do what may seem impossible. And I think today, with the development of technology, we have a chance to do that better and easier than ever. Look forward to today's conversation.
Terrific. Can't wait to dig in a bit more. So maybe let's start with the changing climate, right? How are HCP expectations evolving? How are their behaviors evolving? And what do you think is driving these changes? We saw some of the stats, but want some anecdotes from each of you based on your interactions and experiences with HCPs.
Yeah, why don't I just kick us off here? I think the expectations of healthcare professionals haven't changed so much. They've simply just gone unmet. HCPs continue to seek what they always have: timely, relevant, and clinically meaningful information to provide the best care for their patients. The problem isn't what HCPs want, it's how life sciences industry has historically responded to those needs. For decades, pharma has pushed information through every possible channel, which is a growing list every year. But more often than not, the information is disconnected or misaligned with the HCP's actual needs at that time. So it's not personalized, it's not coordinated. And HCPs have responded accordingly with their behavior. Many avoid rep visits altogether. They delete emails unread. They bounce from a brand site to a rep, having to restart the conversation each time. In the absence of valuable engagement, they turn to their peers and independent research, which can be fragmented or opinionated or outdated or lack the scientific depth that's needed. And the impact is a growing risk. Modern medicine is more complex than ever, from personalized therapies and rare disease treatments to the proliferation of therapeutic options and support programs. Each clinical decision demands clarity, nuance, precision, and it's time for the life sciences industry to rethink its role, not as a broadcaster of information, but as a true clinical partner. And that means delivering tailored, orchestrated, and relevant information when, where, and how HCPs need it. And I think that will then meet their expectations.
That's an interesting perspective, that the HCPs have the same expectations. It's just how we meet those needs is what has evolved. Chris, is that your take on this as well?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Frank said, and I'd maybe answer the question in two parts. What are the expectations and behaviors evolving around AI, and then what are HCP expectations evolving around pharma, right? On AI, once physicians use artificial intelligence, they don't go back. There's an interesting paradigm where it's exciting before you use it, and then it's boring once you use it because it just works and you want to use it every day, right? The technology works, but on the other side, burnout is real, so the problem is really, really acute. So AI has kind of gone from when we started in 2018, when we got the first FDA approval from AI, from a niche innovation to crossing the chasm and being used, pretty much in every single hospital. Doctors now expect it to be available, always on, accurate, and helpful to them, not just finding them more patients, but helping them do their job. They use Viz hourly, not daily, right? And in 90% of the cases where we send a physician an alert about a particular disease that they specialize in, they're viewing those alerts within 5 minutes. So it's also very high engagement in a time-sensitive way. And expectations recently over the past year have shifted even further. They don't just want those alerts. They also want help with pre-charting, with automating documentation, things that help them do their day-to-day job. On interacting with pharma, I think I'm a neurosurgeon, I'm a physician, and I think it's always been true, but even more true today. Doctors don't want pharma to buy them sandwiches. They want assistance during that 5 minutes that matter when they're making a decision about the patient. They want the relevant information, clinical, scientific, administrative, in the 5 minutes when they've got a patient in front of them and they've got some sort of block to providing good care for that patient. And pharma, through the amazing teams that you provide, the MSLs, have the ability to provide that information in real time now with the technology today, as long as those real-time insights are connecting up. And that's what Viz and Salesforce are looking to do.
Yeah.
This is
And
a
maybe
great
jump in, Jane.
Go ahead, Chanda.
I was just going to say, to Chris's point, it's also changing the expectations of the physician, right? Back in the day, the physician needed to know everything about everything, and that's impossible. You're going to see stuff that definitely racks your head. And so it's nice to have something reliable that you can check in with, which is a very natural, instinctive behavior for anyone to demonstrate, but there was just no tools. You had to open your big book and look through page T or whatever you were looking for. So Jane, your point of view on this, please.
Yeah, absolutely right. And when we think about HCP's needs and expectations, we really got to consider the environment that they're in right now. There are many studies that showed the burnout is real, as Chris said, right? I think something like 45% of physicians say that they are burned out. And most work at least 10 hours more on average than people in other professions. I have a friend who is a doctor and she calls it pajama time, right? So after she's done working, she'll come home and she'll do paperwork, right? Like take notes, review patient charts. And she told me that for every 1 hour as a patient, she spends at least 2 hours on documentation, right? What an opportunity to reduce the burden, to help HCPs do their best job. And then, as the industry, it's about reducing the noise. It's about taking advantage of those few seconds, right, that we may get with HCP to provide a relevant insight that is concise, that is personalized, that is exactly what the HCP needs at the moment. Because at the end of the day, those two things combined is what will drive a better patient experience and ultimately better health outcomes.
And Jane, if I could just build on that a little bit. So how has this changed pharma's relationship with both patients as well as HCPs?
I think it's changing, right? I think we're in a journey, but I think the opportunity to change and evolve now is greater than ever, right? When you think about patients today, we all as patients, I think are becoming more empowered and aware and educated and maybe more in control of our health. And I think that's fantastic. If you think about healthcare today or historically, it's all been about disease management, right? We have an opportunity to prevent diseases rather than manage diseases. And I think information and empowerment is key to do that. So as the industry, we have a chance to get the right information to the patients, right? But also the downside and the challenges, there's so much misinformation out there. So lots of opportunity there. Now, when it comes to physicians, we've talked about opportunities such as personalized content, right? Such as engaging differently. And I think strides have been made, but it's challenging. For example, in our industry, we actually produce more content than most people realize. To be able to produce personalized content, you need many, many versions of the content. You need right data, right insights. And I think we're right at a pivotal point where it's becoming possible. I don't think it could be possible without AI, especially if you consider the full life cycle with all of the kind of legal and medical regulatory oversight that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you also need the right clinical context to know when to serve that information so it's
Right.
relevant to that particular patient and physician.
Yes, absolutely. And to be much more precise and dynamic around which HCPs you even target and spend time for.
Yeah.
And continue to look at that dynamically as well as the environment is and the needs are changing. Absolutely,
Yeah.
Chris.
And I think if you do that, you've won, right? Because then the prescribing physician knows that you're on their side and are trying to help them do their job, not trying to sell them something. And I think your point is so well made.
Chris, can you talk to us a little bit about how some decisions are being made at the point of care using AI precisely at the right time, all of the stuff you mentioned?
Yeah, very relevant to what we were just talking about. Your medicine has traditionally been a hub and spoke type model where, when you first have a problem, you're seeing a generalist who doesn't have, the subspecialty expertise in what your disease is. Often you don't have the diagnosis. That's why you're going to see the doctor, the PCP, or the general cardiologist to start off with. And whenever we go in and work with a health system, we actually start with human processes to map the workflow to see what steps happen and where it might be breaking down. And we'll often find that patients have to bounce through dozens, sometimes more than 50 steps before they reach the right specialist. And it's why diagnosis takes so long, right? In one of our use cases for a rare cardiology disease called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and we were able to take the diagnosis time down from between 2 and 5 years to between 2 and 5 weeks because AI collapses those workflow steps by over 90%, kind of like a supercharged freeway from the test that we do instinctively when the patient first sees a physician, an EKG or a CT scan, right, all the way through to the right specialist and guideline-directed treatment. So today, right, we have the ability to detect disease, right? It scans in the EMR. And so we can detect a rare cardiology disease in rural Missouri as well as we can detect it in Cleveland Clinic, right? We can use that to trigger next best action surfacing to both the generalist and the specialist, what guidelines would suggest you should do. And for pharma, that creates a magic moment when that prescribing specialist is making a decision on what to do. And that's really the holy grail. If you can appropriately serve information in that moment of time, they're very highly likely to be receptive to it and act upon it. And so instead of hoping patients eventually get on the right medication, your medication, technology like ours and Frank's enable this guideline-directed bedside decisions to be, so guideline-directed care to happen actually at the bedside. Pharma has spent billions bringing these drugs to market, right? We need to be able to put pharma in the room with that physician when those decisions are being made.
And Jane, have you seen that from your side? So Chris has given a clear example of how making those decisions at that point, at the right point in time, benefits the patient, the physician, and what the opportunity for pharma is. On the pharma side, what opportunities have you unlocked using these technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. At Pfizer, we like to say time is life, right? And Chris gave a great example. If you can compress the time to get to the right diagnosis, you're saving somebody's life, right? And when I think about AI and specifically agentic I think nearly every single process across our organization could be reinvented, right? Many start with internal processes, and historically, we would take a process and we say, well, what could be automated, and then we automate, and there's still room to do that. But the real opportunity is to step back and say, what if we had nothing? Which, by the way, is really tough for a lot of pharma companies that come, with great legacy, but also maybe heritage of culture that is not as open to change, sometimes for good reasons. But nevertheless, if you step back and said, here's the process. If I had nothing, how would I design that process with AI at the center? How could I design the process if I had agents, right, acting as teammates together with colleagues, and how could they work together? I think this is where the true opportunity is. And I think all the way from like early drug discovery, right, and identifying the right compounds faster, all the way to how do you go through manufacturing with the perfect kind of batch record, right, and no deviations, and all the way to how you engage. I think every single thing we do has an opportunity to be transformed.
So for all three of you, as AI is increasingly being adopted and you can see it in front of your eyes, how's that shifting your internal priorities as a company, in terms of whether it's your product roadmap, your strategy, how's that evolving?
I think for Salesforce, we're realizing HCP's use of AI can generate new insights that previously weren't possible, right? Having information that's generated by the use of AI can become signals for accuracy of engagement at the point of care, at the point of promotion, at the point of education. Pharma doesn't always have a good understanding of what's happening at that point of care, but with new AI solutions like Viz, you can deepen farmers' understanding with access to real-time workflow and decisions, which, again, historically farmers hasn't had access to. But if we zoom out, thinking about how the content that you have around products and programs and how to match it to the questions and needs HCPs have through the AI channels that they're using, that needs to become a priority. It's a priority for our product development as well to support this. Our HCPs visiting dozens of brand websites a day every night? No, they're starting to use AI-enabled clinical decision support systems. Just like we in our daily lives use ChatGPT and Gemini, and we get our answers much, much quicker. So it's important for a pharma company and for us from a technology standpoint to create an accurate and clear path from that AI clinical support system, which is not specific to any drug or therapeutic area or any manufacturer, to an organization's specific product information. The content is interacting with LLMs and RAG, and in the past you didn't need to think about that, and now it needs to become a priority.
I definitely think about this a lot. Like, what's the replacement for websites, apps, all of these things? Like, what's the next user interface, really? I think that's very interesting.
And by the way,
And
speaking of websites, if you look historically, right, most of us in the industry, we create many websites, and many of them, bring a lot of value. But in reality, it's been really challenging to get HCP to want to come to websites to look for information, right? I think some have been more successful than others, right? Now we have an opportunity to bring information to them. And ultimately, I think that is the strategy, right? It's how do you get the right insights? How do you bring it to them? But also realizing that they will be using ChatGPTs and other technology. How do you optimize your website, for example, to be able to surface exactly the right content to be consumed by the LLMs to then provide that content to the HCP?
You take it to them rather than bringing them to your.
Yeah, absolutely. And take to them when they need it in their flow of work.
Yeah.
yeah,
There's a
it's
question.
evolving, isn't it? It's evolving dramatically. It's gone from blunt tools, TV ads,
Yeah.
websites, to, much more precise targeting. And I think we can now do this, right? So, we've had to evolve how we think, particularly as we partner with Salesforce. One use case was one of the programs we have. We were finding a lot more patients, with the AI safety net. We were getting them to the relevant specialist, but this particular drug had a REMS program attached, and so the workflow was breaking at that point of the REMS program. You could think about it the same around, prior auth or copay, like administrative breakdown. And so we were like, fantastic. What we can do is we can pull the pharma teams in at that moment. They can provide information, right? We can do it in real time. Then Frank's team said to me, well, hang on, why don't we just do this with an agent? Like pharma has already developed all of this information in a very compliant way that humans have to deliver. Why can't we build an agent that can actually answer those questions of the HCP in real time? And so as the technology evolves, actually, even those of us at the cutting edge are having to evolve and rethink how we can deliver value for our customers.
And just going off something that Jay mentioned, I mean, if you think about it, we want to be where the HCP is going, right? We want to be there ready to give them the information. So we're really leveraging the three different methods of AI. We're leveraging predictive AI to predict what they're going to want to know and where they're going to want it. We're using generative AI to tailor that content, generate that content in the right messages, and then we're using agentic AI to take action on it. And so all three different types of AI come together to create that experience of meeting the HCP or meeting the patient where they are.
Yeah.
And we talk
There's
a lot around how we use technologies and how do we think about our engagement, right, with HCPs or patients. But I think what's also incredibly important is how do we take advantage of technology and better equip our colleagues, right? Our customer-facing colleagues. Most organizations, even the most progressive ones, even organizations that have a single CRM, for example, right? Most customer-facing colleagues have to go to many, many places, various dashboards, various data sources, right? Various systems to be able to get information they need, right? And their ability to consolidate and derive insights vary, right? So what an opportunity to make it easy for them, right? To bring insights near real time or real time, to equip them to have the right conversation, so that, our kind of best assets when it comes to the engagement, they have the best tools to be able to do that well.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and nice segue into a question that someone in the audience has asked us, and I wanted to bring forward as well, our KPIs, right? What are the metrics of success? Before we started using agentic AI or any other form of AI, and after, and maybe some of the KPIs, to your point, Jane, are internal, efficiencies, etc. But welcome everyone's thoughts on these, and the more concrete we are, I think the more helpful it'll be for those listening.
I can start first. First, and I think this applies to new technology and everything else, I think it's really important to be measuring outcomes versus activities. And by the way, us technology geeks, right? Even the ones who are senior in the organization, we often tend to think about activity, right? Did we deliver new technology? Is it live, right? That's an activity. That's not an outcome, right? Are we seeing better NPS scores from our customers? That's an outcome, right? So really thinking through and defining what good looks like in terms of business outcomes is key, and it's really, really hard. And what I would also say is that if you do that, you will find that 90% of use cases for AI or agentic AI you're running are probably not as impactful as you think. So that will help you to get to what are the top 3 most impactful ones that can drive impact and move the needle, and then focus on those. I think that's really, really important as well. The other thing I've noticed is that, especially with the new technology, there's a tendency to target softer savings, right? Like, yes, well, this will have bottom line or top line, but it's hard to express. I think we got to challenge ourselves and our teams to say, like, what exactly will it do? And what would be the hard dollars, for example, it would be saved, and then hold ourselves to it, because that will also help us make better decisions, and frankly, kill things that are maybe not showing indication of results that we're looking for.
Yeah, if I was just to build off that, KPIs have been lagging metrics for years, disguised as leading indicators through predictive models. While valuable, so much more is possible now. AI enables those lagging metrics to be augmented with true leading indicators that align to commercial excellence and to better patient outcomes. I think to most, AI represents automation and productivity gains. So a great new KPI that we've seen surface to the top is how much administrative burden and research time is being eliminated for patients, providers, for your customer-facing colleagues, Jane, and the intersection of all three. But productivity can also be looked at as an opportunity cost KPI. How many touch points are we not making because we have the insights to know that it would not be useful to that HCP? So reducing both administrative and wasted time gives people time back to focus on, what makes a difference. And, the industry may still look at interactions per week and other metrics of input, versus output, as Jane mentioned, but now they can set those KPIs as value goals. Like how well do they know their HCPs or patients, and how are they meeting their patients and provider when, where, and how that patient and provider needs them?
And Chris,
And I
any
think
KPIs that you are specifically measuring, maybe as an outcome of your service or partnership with Pharma as well?
yeah, we in many ways we focus on the same KPIs. We've just got better tools every, month as we develop new technologies to deliver on those KPIs. The KPIs are the more patients get treated. That serves our mission to increase access to life-saving treatments directly, right? Do they get treated with the right guideline-directed therapy? Did the time to diagnosis shrink, right, from a baseline? Does pharma have a more efficient and effective go-to-market? Because I think this is a fundamental shift to how pharma goes to market, but the goal is still the same. We want patients to have better outcomes with all of our technologies. And so kind of measuring the broad KPIs the same way. Of course, the
Right.
leading indicators will evolve as we start to get, like maybe it's time served to an agent versus time served to an MSL, right? Instead of using lagging data like what you might traditionally get 3 months later, you can get real-time data knowing that today in hospital X, right, there's a lot of engagement with, a lung cancer pathway. And so I think those leading indicator KPIs are going to evolve, but the broader overarching ones around patients treated stay the same.
I want to just
I
pick up,
wanted
there's some, Jane, go ahead.
just one other point as we're talking about KPIs, because this is a topic that hasn't come up. As we think about AI and how do we measure AI, right? Quality is incredibly important, right? So the topic of responsible and ethical AI, I don't think it's more important in any other industry than us. So, whether it's a specific KPI or not, it's incredibly important as we take on these projects for us to always be thinking about, like, is there bias? Are we developing algorithms? Are we feeding the right data to make sure that we get the right insights and that they do not degrade over time? I think the value of the platforms, for example, the platforms we're talking about here, VizAI and Salesforce, is that the risk is reduced, right? Because you have a contained data set that's managed within the platform generally, and quality is more assured. But nevertheless, when we think about AI technologies, like we just continually got to think about quality and making sure we use the technology responsibly.
There's so many great questions coming in, so I'm going to spend a couple minutes picking up on one or two of them, and then we can continue on. What role do you see geo, so I'm assuming regionality, playing in engaging HCPs? Any thoughts on that
We're
based on
all
experience?
thinking about that. I mean, I think preferences, experiences, cultural differences, regulations, you've got the EU AI Act. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be opportunities that do vary by region. Advice I would give to organizations is think about where you can apply AI globally, and then, sort of double click into it to make sure you understand how regionally you want to refine it.
I will speak to maybe another dimension of it. As you think about AI in life sciences and organizations for large global companies, right? How do you think about it? And I think historically, many organizations have been quite siloed internally in how they function, right? Data is not always well connected, well integrated. And as a result, we duplicate the wheel. And now with technologies like vibe coding and others, it's so easy. Like the barrier for entry is actually lower. So I think there's a high risk of proliferation and duplication of work. And by the way, that also applies to some of the externally facing assets. Like you think about content, right? Across many of our companies, like content gets kind of recreated, replicated, and then, some maybe even unnecessary cycles of approvals for content. So strategies around global versus local, right? And how do you think about your approach? How do you create the right foundation while still allowing for local regional deviations? And how do you architect your solutions in a way that is modular and reusable? Because this is really, I think, where you get advantage of the scale. And I think with AI, that advantage is also amplified, but it has to be done right up front.
Yeah. I actually heard the question slightly differently. I thought it was maybe generative engine optimization. So instead of SEO,
Okay.
GEO. So I'll answer that one. Maybe it was.
Yeah, it could be
Look,
that like that. That's
Be the doctor in the room, okay.
we're hearing this a lot because, instead of optimizing your Google search results, how do you optimize what ChatGPT,
right.
Claude, etc. is saying? Look, I think there's overlap, like making sure there's good scientific content out there that's clear that models can easily parse and summarize, right? Using natural language, right? The way people ask questions versus, scientific jargon, right? Gone are the ways even in SEO where you'd keyword stuff. You need to really
Right.
explain it clearly. Making sure content is fresh and refreshed. Like I think, it's you increasingly have to remain relevant around a topic and produce new information because these large language models are passing this information, every hour, every day. And I think also engage with the companies, right? Engage with the open AIs and the Claudes, try and understand how their models are changing, how you can help them to make their models better. That's if that was the question, that's how I would recommend answering it.
I mean, we've answered two different questions now, which is excellent, and learn something new every day. Thank you, Chris.
Well done.
One more question, which is a really nice segue into a segment I wanted to double click into a little bit. Do you imagine that the pharma commercial model will eliminate the need for face-to-face sales calls? If the pharma rep can't meet the timely, relevant, and personalized needs, then why would a physician see a rep?
I don't think AI is there to replace the rep. I think it is there to support the rep, and it is to support the patient and support the provider so that, a rep isn't working 24 hours a day, right? It extends and it augments the capacity of that rep. I think of AIs, if I'm a large, life sciences organization, I've got 10,000 reps across the globe. I want them to be able to operate like 20,000 reps. And AI is what extends that. We call it digital labor, but it is really supporting that human in the loop. I mean, there's nothing that beats this. This isn't a webinar of four AI, avatars talking. It's, some of this is real-time responses. And I think that human element needs to stay there. I think even if providers have had frustration in the past, there's nothing that beats that human connection.
Yeah. But it
Frank,
allows the humans to do more. Oh, sorry, continue.
go ahead, Chris. Read first.
Yeah, but I agree, and it also allows the human rep to do more because I think reps that use AI will replace reps that don't. I think pharma companies that leverage AI platforms will outperform those that don't. And we are not in a world where 90 to 100% of our total addressable market, the patients with the disease, are getting your target therapy. Like not even close. You're probably closer to 10 to 20%. And so let's leverage these technologies to focus on getting more patients treated with the relevant medications. And the only way to do that, I think, is a combination of these real-time agentic type tools together with that human trust element that Frank's speaking to.
I would add, I think we had sort of a mini pilot of this during pandemic. Now, it wasn't AI, right? But during pandemic, a lot of reps went and switched to virtual calling, and we have really good data comparing that experience. Now, it worked really well during pandemic, and it kept everybody safe. And there was a hypothesis that at some point to say, well, maybe this is how the world is going to be going forward. Maybe we will never go back to
The
in-person
new normal.
interaction. Yes, yes. But you know what? We now had enough time and data to say not at all, right? In some areas, yes, it makes sense, but there's significantly greater impact when it comes to those in-person interactions, as Frank said. And I think it's almost a little bit like a question of, physicians, right? Will AI become your physician in the future? Will physicians be
Right.
going away? And I think it will amplify us, and I think it may actually make us more human in a way. When ChatGPT just came out, I don't know if you read articles to where some doctors would actually use ChatGPT to find better ways to explain things to patients in a more empathetic, less technical way. So almost like even using technology to improve their bedside manners and become more human. And that's a lot of what I think AI could bring for us going forward.
It's a wonderful message, Jane. So all this change is now coming with some fundamental shifts in thinking within a large pharma organization, right? So maybe we'll start with, in your experience, which functions within pharma are the leaders, front runners in terms of their adoption of AI or openness to using AI? Chris, which functions do you
Yeah,
work
I
with
don't
the
think it's
longest?
across the board. Look, I think it's really team dependent, and the infrastructure that team or the ecosystem that team is working in. Do the leaders in the pharmaceutical company encourage
Mhm.
them to adopt the technology, to think differently, to clear the way for technological innovation? We're seeing increasingly the pharmaceutical companies are assigning or hiring CTOs, chief technology officers. I see that Amgen, a BMS, and these leaders are able to streamline the innovations through so that like the legal and compliance hurdles, the new way of doing commercial motion actually can start getting piloted and then, scaled. On our side, we really we help with clinical trials, but our real focus area is helping with commercial go-to-market. And that's crossed the chasm. Like 3 years ago, we started working with our first pharmaceutical company, which was BMS, and we learned a lot. We learned that actually building, an AI tool that just assessed a data set wasn't enough. You had to really build it into the workflow, both on the HCP side and the commercial pharma side. And now, we work with many of the companies in the room, many of top pharma, and increasingly that working together as a team to try and drive appropriate behavior is becoming the norm in commercial pharma. And so I think it's crossed the chasm. It's going to be really a part of every brand launch going forward.
Go for it, Jane.
Yes, I agree with Chris. And I think we all are different levels of maturity when it comes to AI, right? I mean, traditionally, you've seen quite a lot of it, across commercial, a lot of it internal, some exploratory work across other areas, kind of early drug discovery and others. But I would argue that based on where we are and where we're going, we should be thinking about every single task, process, every single function across our organization and thinking about how we will reinvent it with AI. I actually think it's more than a nice to have. I think it's a necessity for us to be able to do what we need to do to get medicines to patients and remain competitive and viable. What I will also say is that I think this may be tougher for industries and some other industries. I spent many years in CPG, in consumer product goods. And when I joined a pharma company, I was shocked at some of the cultural elements. For example, I think we're a lot more siloed. I think we're a lot more hesitant to share data across, maybe for good reasons, right? And we have a lot of restrictions. And a lot of those restrictions, I believe, are self-imposed. They were maybe self-imposed many decades ago, and maybe there was a compliance regulatory reasons, right? But often we just keep using our old playbooks, not always knowing what it is that we're doing and is it absolutely necessary or not. So I think technology is there, right? But I think the bigger challenge for us is to really step back and culturally and say, how do we reinvent ourselves and how do we keep doing that? Let technology help us, but I think a lot of it's about ways of working and the mindset and how we approach our work.
So what are some of those conversations you're having internally that are essential, to bring about this change? And do you think AI is bringing together different cross-functional teams better than before?
I think it is. When it comes to conversations, I'll highlight maybe three things. I think one, focus is really important, right? It's natural across organizations to have many, many POCs and MVPs. What we also found is that creating technology is often the easiest part, right? And even getting it in the hands of 10 people, 30 people is the easy part. How do you then scale it, right? How do you win minds and hearts? And how do you have the right signals and KPIs to understand if it's working? And how do you have the courage to admit when it's not, right? And when it doesn't, have the courage to say, maybe we should kill this particular project. I think that's incredibly important. And I think we need to continue to do more of that. I think of it as create, test, fail, or create, test, scale, and be able to do it quickly.
Yeah, it's
I
important.
think, go ahead.
I was just going to go, it's very important when choosing a partner that not only can they build the technology, because that's become the easy part, but they can scale it through the human processes that exist in the HCP world, whether it's IT security, whether it's workflow adoption. If you don't do that, your 5-hospital pilot is not going to scale and make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris.
So we went through a phase just in the last, 5, 6 years, so many apps, patient engagement, companion apps, etc. And that was the big movement. Every pharma company partnered with, and some of these are actually incredible solutions, and they've really actually helped patients. So it's not to take away from what these products did, but we did end up with lots of different applications for the same indications. So question is, are we headed in the same direction? Several agents, all kind of doing the same thing. How do we approach this?
So I think what you're speaking to is more of that ecosystem, right? If I'm hearing the question correctly, and for information to flow compliantly and be activated at scale, the ecosystem must be intelligently connected. Historically, this meant either full platform consolidation or complex integrations that demanded continuous updates as data sources change and system components evolve. But we're entering a new paradigm, one shaped by the rise of these agentic technologies. In this world, intelligent agents are they're not only interacting with systems through APIs, but increasingly with other agents across disparate systems. Agent to agent communication is emerging as a critical layer of connectivity, one that accelerates the decision making and unlocks real-time data flows across the commercial stack. Yet perhaps the most important is the need for adaptability. Innovation is moving too fast for any system to be considered future-proof. I hear that term used a lot, and what's optimal today may be obsolete 2 years from now. Look back just 3 years ago. Could anyone have accurately predicted what we'd be doing today, what we'd be talking about right now? And so just imagine the pace of change is only accelerating. So think about what's going to be 3 years from now. So being future ready is not about locking in the perfect architecture. It's about building with agility in mind, the ability to evolve systems, those ecosystems, without excessive costs, without excessive disruption or technical debt, in that will define what competitive advantage is, because you're going to see agentic technical debt pile up very quickly if you don't do that. And as commercial models grow more dynamic, the systems that support them must be equally malleable, composable, and resilient, capable of adapting as fast as the market demands it to adapt.
Yeah, because I think the technology provides a fundamental opportunity for pharma to rethink how they go to market. And the pharmaceutical executives like Jane, right, who see the future and are building for that are going to win. And those who rely on, more legacy processes, I don't think will.
And I would add, I think it's a real watch out for organizations that are starting to play with agents, right? And that risk that you talked about, right? Potentially, having hundreds, if not thousands of agents, right? This can be very easily a reality if we're not thoughtful about it. So while we're in early days, I think a holistic enterprise strategy around technology and the strategic platforms for agentic AI is key. And then a strategy around what is that architecture of the agents, right? For example, there's a perspective that says no company needs more than 50 agents total, right? Like you can have an agent that is a data retrieval agent, for example, right? But you can then reuse those agents if you set them up the right way and you have the right technology foundation, and then you reuse them rather than potentially finding ourselves with tech debt, as Frank said, many years from now, kind of not knowing how to manage all of the technology that got created.
So we have lots of other pharma leaders who are listening in. What is your advice to those who are ready to lean in? Where should they start, or what should they stop doing?
Yeah, I'll give a couple of perspective points here. Engage with your peers. Yeah, that's probably the first thing I'd say. Every organization is somewhere on the journey of transforming its commercial ecosystems and ways that they're engaging, ways they're working. The pace of change is really unprecedented. Experimentation is constant, and best practices are being written in real time. There's immense value in learning from one another, what's working, what isn't, and what's emerging. So that's one, and you guys should understand that not all use cases are created equal. The juice isn't always worth the squeeze. And others can tell you that. They've tried something like, it took us all this effort to do this one thing and it didn't actually save anybody any time. So you've got to think about the effort versus the value, and the value versus the change management, and the change management versus the risk. My opinion is you should start with high value, no risk, not low risk, but no risk and low effort AI use cases. You can still learn from those experiences, and that will help you be informed for the next use case. And I also say stay close to your technology, your data, and your SI partners. They are your window into what's truly possible beyond your specific organization. And just as importantly, what they seem promising but fails, they'll see things that you might not. Trusted partners can help you navigate this complexity. And Jay mentioned this earlier, enable your teams with AI education, enable them. 25 years ago, if you were in IT, you were likely a database administrator. And that's what most people in IT were. And so you take that to today, every function at every company can be truly transformed by leveraging and developing these AI skills, knowing what questions to ask, knowing how to interact with agents. That's becoming a new skill that I think everybody's learning on the fly.
Jane, your advice for fellow pharma leaders?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. First, I think learning is incredibly important. Frank touched on that. And I think learning agility is also really, really important. Frank talked about equipping your teams with AI skills. I would argue that we need to better equip ourselves with AI skills, right? I think the world and technology, it's changing so fast that if we're not in the mode of continuously learning ourselves and leading by example, we will not be successful. And I'll share with you one experience that I had. I had this idea of doing something with AI, right? And I approached a team member and I said, well, what would it take? And what platform could you use to do this, right? And they said, well, let me go and talk to partners and SIs. And, and then 2 weeks later, they came back with something. They said, it's an 8 months project and, X million of dollars. And I was like, okay. And then coincidentally, I happened to have a conversation next day with another team member who I think on his own spent more time playing with some of the new technology. And he said, I can create it for you by tomorrow. And he did, right? And I think it's such a simple example, but for us as leaders, technology changing so fast, we need to understand better what's possible. Even if you're a technology, digital AI leader and you think that's already your core, what you know today, right, may not be the reality tomorrow. So I would say that's one thing that I would kind of greatly encourage you to do. But then also, how do you then help the rest of the organization with AI literacy? And how do you win hearts and minds? Like let's face it, right? People still don't understand AI, and there's a lot of concern, and a lot of us see AI as a threat. And I think we need to continue educating and helping everybody see that as a useful tool to amplify their impact.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, educate yourself, move fast. I think the platform that we've showcased today is a new opportunity, right? How great would it be as a pharma marketer if you could be in the workflow with your HCPs before they've made a decision? Well, now you can realize that exists, find out about it, use it. The window is open now, right? The technology works, right? And in the health system side of the world, adoption is accelerating, right? You can see that 2/3 of the country, of the population in the United States, are covered by our platform, for example. But you need to reduce complexity for adoption and scaling, right? So I mentioned the CTO, the exec team's got to take a real leadership position here. Often the CEOs of companies are getting involved in thinking through the next gen go to market because they need to have this multi-dimensional process to get these things through. It's been said, but I really, really think what Jane said about choosing scaled, clinically trusted partners is important because you can pilot this technology at, Mass General, or ivory tower institutions. But what really matters is that it can scale through the entirety of the HCA network or the tenant network, so doctors and patients can benefit at scale. And lastly, I'd advise you strongly don't wait, right? This is a world where first movers in pharma will shape the new model, and late movers will have to inherit that model.
Brilliant. Profound advice all around. This has been terrific. We have so many questions that we won't be able to address in the hour, but we will circle back with folks. I think there's some very specific questions addressed to each of you so we can follow up. And there's a really nice comment there. On a lighter note, Chris, Frank, and Jane, are we going to see you at Health USA with your sparkly jacket next month, hopefully? I just want to say thank you so much to all three of you. This was amazing. The hour just flew by and really enlightening as well. Thank you so much for joining and for sharing.
Thank you to VizAI and Salesforce and to everyone that joined us today. Please visit our website, HLTH.com, to catch up on our health webinars and to watch the recording of today's session. Join us in Las Vegas, October 19th to 22nd for Health USA.